Due to emergency circumstances that arose and audio-graded on-demand service being down this week, for the first time ever, the Razman's reality radio show, Geeky.com archive, is being presented via YouTube's video uploading service. As such, if the broadcast quality is not accustomed to what you would normally be hearing on the radio program, it has to do with either the compression involved with having to re-edit it in the form of a quote-unquote video, or the compression involved when turning that quote-unquote video into flash format in order for YouTube to present it. I hope you enjoy, and if you missed the last video update, be sure to check that out in order to provide crucial, important feedback involving the future of this radio program.
Hey, what's up? This is Stoudman, founder of Geeky.com, and you're listening to my bud Raz here on the Razman's Reality Radio Show, brought to you by Geeky.com when it's just not geeky enough, on audio graded and channel 107.
The Razman's Reality Radio Show is on the air for another week in your ear. I, of course, am your host, the Razman, and I do apologize in advance as today's session may feature some background noise. I also want to clear up the confusion that has happened over the last couple weeks with the station airings. What happened is I had a cancellation 2 weeks ago, so I had to scramble and put a show together, and I didn't get the show together until the day before it was supposed to air. So the people at Audio Graded didn't get the show until much later than they normally would, and literally, and I'm not kidding you, literally, right after that show was uploaded to the internet and sent out to them to air, my video card went out on my computer. I have a chance to communicate with one of the two people that are normally in charge of airing the show over the air on Audio Graded, so the show didn't actually air on Audio Graded as it was intended to, and just went straight up on iTunes the next day. So if you missed that program, just go and check out our iTunes podcast feed. It'll be the one right before this edition that you hear tonight. And then last week what happened was that myself and DJ Bob here on Audio Graded, and also my colleague on channel 107, when channel 107 gets back up and running, I believe it's around Easter that we'll have that station back up and running. It is switching over to be a part of the network here that Audio Graded is a part of as well. So that's why we haven't had a time slot on there for a while. But as I was saying, DJ Bob and I were working on a joint event together, which is a 90s Celebration 2, which is a sequel to the show in which we interviewed Nickelodeon famed star Kel Mitchell. Well, we also had a chance to talk to Nickelodeon famed star Josh Server, and we were working on putting together that show, and that show just didn't get aired in time for last week as it was intended to cover both our time slots, and also I had a lot of company last week and just didn't have time to sit down and do the solo show like I wanted to. So that is what has been going on with the program, but we are back in action this week. So to start it off this week, we are going to air a portion of an interview with AJ, the owner and creator of Channel 107, that he is going to air on an anniversary program that I believe will air on March the 23rd, which is to coincide with the anniversary of the European release of the PlayStation 3 gaming console. He asked my opinion on the controversial decision that Sony made to no longer allow backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 2. So I'm going to play you the audio from that interview, and then from that I'm going to lead right into talking about my latest PlayStation 3 purchase, which is MLB 12 The Show. So, enjoy.
Hi, yes, so if you're familiar with the Razman reality show, then you'll be familiar with the Razman, who's here with us now on this 5th anniversary show to celebrate the PlayStation 3 in the UK and Europe. It was actually released in March 2007. You're a PlayStation 3 owner, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
So, what model have you got?
I have the later 120 gigabyte slim model.
Right, so this is the one, and this is what we're talking about tonight. One of Sony's most controversial decisions over the 5 years was to take out, in the more recent models of the PlayStation 3, the ability to play PlayStation 2 games. The original PlayStation 3 that was out could play the entire lot, from PlayStation 1 right up to PlayStation 3. The newer models can still play PlayStation 1 games. It's just the PS2 games that have been taken out. Although it was always a bit dodgy in Europe, they used an emulator for the PS2 on the first model, so some games didn't quite work as well as they would if you played them in the PlayStation 2 themselves. E.g., there might be choppy graphics, things flashing, or scenery disappearing, a few things that I've noticed. But, you know, what's your take generally on what Sony have chose to do, though, which is to completely remove all PS2 playback in the most recent PS3s?
Well, I think the one advantage to it over here overseas seems to be that Blu-ray discs themselves run faster. And that was the one thing I heard Sony talk about, is that they wanted to lessen what the machine was actually trying to do so that the games themselves would run better, and more importantly, Blu-ray movies would run better, because a lot of people like me use the system simultaneously as a Blu-ray film player as well. I did have a standalone Blu-ray player when I first got a high-definition TV, but once I got a PlayStation 3, I said I didn't have enough inputs in the back of my first TV. I do now, where I could have a standalone and a PlayStation 3 hooked up if I wanted to. But back then I didn't have a way to do that, so I was using it as an all-in-one machine, and it does play Blu-rays very well. So I think that was part of the reason, but I do think that there's absolutely a way that they could put PS2 games back into it if they wanted to, and they should, because the PS2 is a very good console, and I actually made the mistake when I first upgraded from standard definition to high definition. All I had was an Xbox 360 console at the time, and I put all my money into getting new high definition games, and actually sold off my PS2. And to this day, I regret that, because there were some really good games for that console that I wish I still had. So, yeah, I would love to see them put that back in there. But it's just a matter of figuring out how they would do it with the modern way that the PlayStation runs now, because I think that the Slim model works a little differently than the 60 gigabyte model.
Yeah, because, I mean, but what is the issue with them doing that? Because, controversially, they've recently decided to start selling some PS2 games in the PSN store alongside the PS1 classics they've got in there, which shows that it must clearly have the technical ability to easily play these PlayStation 2 games. Now, obviously, they've probably been optimized. Maybe the downloads have been optimized to actually work well with the PS3, but whereas the data on the original discs might actually have not been optimized, but it clearly shows that the capability of the PlayStation 3 is at least there. I mean, if they actually wanted to work harder on the emulation to get PS2 games to play back correctly, then maybe they could. It kind of...
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, AJ. I think that the issue probably is that back then everything was done on a lesser quality disc, aka lesser quality encoding, when they made the game. So the PlayStation 3 is trained to handle at max, in some cases, 1080p game encoding. So I think it's automatically perhaps trying to upconvert the quality that's using, and maybe the problem came with the more advanced the disc became, the more harder it was for the system more hard is not a word. the harder that it was for the system to realize that, oh, I'm processing lesser technology here. How do I do it smoothly? Whereas online, you're able to just take the actual original encode that you would have put on a disk, but you're having it on the online server, I think is what's happening. So you're getting a direct download rather than the disk itself passing the game through. I think that's part of the issue.
I don't think it is. I think what they might have done is optimize it with the download version, as in they may have corrected some of the emulation issues with individual games. But if they could do that, maybe they could work harder on actually emulating the games. The PlayStation 2 was the biggest seller of all time in consoles ever, and there's over 1,400 titles. So what do you think about the people who say, as I've seen online with some of the people who miss the PS2 playback, that in fact they get more? They say they actually get more fun from playing their PS2 games than they do in the range of games that have been released on PS3 so far, but just because it was so good. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's all a matter of opinion, because I got the PlayStation 3 specifically because I thought the Xbox 360 was very limited, and it wasn't giving me the gameplay experience that I wanted, particularly in baseball. The 2K franchise in baseball here in America absolutely is terrible, and I wanted to play the Sony exclusive MLB The Show, which I will be talking about MLB 12 The Show on this week's edition of the Razman's Reality Radio Show. So this week at the time of this recording, which you'll hear this interview twice. You'll hear it on my show, this portion, and then you'll hear it whenever your show on the PlayStation 3 airs, the anniversary show. But my point is that I originally got the PlayStation 3 because of that game and other games like Uncharted 2 and Assassin's Creed. So there were specific games that I wanted to play on PlayStation. So I think that it is still a very enjoyable experience, particularly from the graphic standpoint and the realism that you can have there as far as gameplay. But the PlayStation 2 did have, as I said, a lot of great games to it, and there are a lot of great memories with that console, more so than others, because it did sell so well. So, yeah, I absolutely do agree that I missed the PlayStation 2 playback, and it would be great if they could somehow, because everything is done in firmware now and optimization through software, it would be great if they don't want to actually put it back in the system, because they would have to release all new consoles, and then everybody that had the current consoles would be kind of screwed. But it would be wonderful if they could somehow release a firmware patch where you could download that firmware update and PlayStation 2 playback capability would be right back in your system. That would be a wonderful thing to happen. I would love that.
Well, I mean, a lot of people would. I mean, it could just be about money. It could be about the fact that games can be re-released, sometimes as HD remakes. It could even be that the emulation issues of the entire range of PlayStation 2 games was too much for them, and they wanted to move because of that. Sony have never really been clear about exactly why they've done this. But
it's a sad thing to admit, but everything is all about money. I think you have a really good point there. I think they just feel like all their money can go toward HD remakes or toward actually putting out new product rather than so much giving the consumer what they want. But they still are the number one console out there for the hardcore gamer, but they've actually been surpassed by Nintendo in the family game market with the Wii, which is why they created the Move and all of that. So they're clearly not perfect, and they should definitely listen to their consumer and give their consumer what they want, because they'd be better off for it. That's really all I can say about it as far as that goes.
Well, okay, thanks very much, Raz, for that view on the Sony PS3 and where it is up to now. A lot of people are saying that naysayers of the removal of PS2 playback, the ones who say they don't mind, say that they buy a PS3 to play PS3 games. But it seems a weird argument because, obviously, if you do that, you can already play these games, and why would you want to lose something extra? Something that has become something extra. But we thought they would just stick with the ability to play all PlayStation games, but Xbox 360's backward compatibility is rather lacking. It's offered at all, but a lot of original Xbox games still don't work to this day. So
yeah, it's a weird thing. I think it has to do with optimization and just not putting the time and effort into it the way they should have. I don't know why the original consoles worked better than the newer consoles, other than all I can say is when they made it slim, that perhaps the way that they made it to make it slimmer and run smoother and have a bigger hard drive had something to do with taking away whatever was making the PlayStation 2 backwards capability work. And as far as Xbox goes, I mean, who knows there? They've, as you said, that has never worked completely all the way through on 360. So I don't know. I mean, we're not game makers, unfortunately, so it's all just hearsay and guessing. But to sum it up, PlayStation 2 backwards capability should definitely be in a PlayStation 3, and I hope it happens again soon.
Okay, thanks very much.
So there you have it. That was my conversation with Channel 107's AJ on the controversial decision of PlayStation to take away PS2 backwards compatibility. I hope you enjoyed that. Now, speaking of PlayStation 3, one of the reasons that I've had so much company as of late is because I had the great fortune of being given as a gift the latest version of the MLB The Show baseball game for the PlayStation 3, MLB 12 The Show. And I gotta tell you, this game, it just continues to blow me away year after year after year. As I said in that interview with AJ, it was the main reason that I picked up the Sony PlayStation 3. Straight up. Because I was sick to death of the awfulness of the 2K baseball franchise, and the fact that you have a new console that is supposed to give you so much more gameplay-wise, and you're getting a worse gameplay-wise, all around, gameplay, graphics, everything, than you got on a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox. It was just completely ridiculous. So I said enough is enough, and I finally convinced my parents why I needed a PlayStation 3, because baseball has always been my favorite sport. And actually, when we get done talking about the show here, as we come back from break, I'm going to be talking about / reviewing the film Moneyball, which is a true baseball story. And then after that, time permitting, I'm going to be talking about my favorite team, the Cincinnati Reds, and where I think they will stand going into 2012 season. So you can tell how much baseball means to me. So baseball video games are as much a part of who I am and what I do, and integrated into me as the sport of baseball is itself. So to not have a decent baseball game was just like, no, can't do that. No, won't do it ever again in my life, type of a thing. So, as I was saying, this game continues to surprise me year after year after year with just how good it continues to be. I mean, eventually you think with the modern technology and the limitations of the current console that eventually you're going to reach a ceiling where you can't really do anything else with it. And fortunately enough, that has not been the case at all for San Diego Studio, the makers of MLB The Show. So much so that they went back this year with their developers, and they decided what are the drawbacks of our game, and they picked apart each one of those drawbacks and made them better. And the first one that they addressed was ball physics, which is something that's been lacking from any baseball title ever through the course of video gaming in general, is that the ball doesn't move and act the way that a ball should move and act when you're playing a baseball game. In other words, you don't see the ball react differently depending on how flush you get the bat on the ball. So if you don't get the ball flush on the bat, it's supposed to either pop straight up in the air or go straight into the ground and take a funny hop on the ground. It's supposed to spin when it's in the air off the bat, depending on how hard it's hit, and the dramaticness of that spin is supposed to affect where the ball goes and how easy it is to pick it up and make a play with it. So all of those things were lacking from a baseball game until now, because the makers of MLB The Show actually went and did the research and talked to experts about ball physics and actually implemented ball physics into their game. So you're finally seeing realistic animations that were never possible in a video game before, where you see guys victimized by bad hops all the time, and a lot of infield hits happening that would never happen before, a lot of errors happening in the infield and outfield that would never happen before, because a ball will take a funny hop either by hitting a base flush on or hitting a piece of the ground on the infield flush on or the outfield flush on. As for an example, you see a grounder to third base, and depending on the condition of the field that you're playing in, because each field plays differently in the major leagues depending on how it's kept up. Thankfully, the Great American Ballpark where the Reds play is one of the better fields in all the major leagues as far as being able to play evenly and consistently every game, in and out, because of how well the field is maintained. But a lot of fields, and even that field that's very well kept up, you do get balls taking funny hops. So you'll see a grounder to third base and the ball shoots up like it has a rocket ship underneath it and takes a really bad hop and it can't be fielded. That's one of the things you see in the game. Another thing that you see in the game now is when a guy dives for the ball in the outfield and doesn't get it, and it goes off the edge of his glove and skates all the way to the wall. You see that now, so literally diving is a true consequence now, because if you don't get to a ball when you dive for it, it's not going to just, stay there and allow you to regroup it quickly and make the play and throw the guy out. No, what's actually going to happen now is that you're going to miss that ball, and that ball's going to hop off the glove, using the glove as a catalyst, hop 50 feet in the air, well, not 50 feet, but, so many feet in the air, and then come back down, and it's going to be all the way to the wall behind you by the time you're able to recoup from it. So you see a heck of a lot more triples or long doubles than you ever saw in MLB The Show before, or any baseball game before, because of that element. So there's that, and that change also lends itself to animation of running in the game. Because the ball acts the way it's supposed to act off the bat, if you get a hard line drive going right back up the box in the infield, what is going to happen to you is that essentially you're, as the runner on base, going to have to avoid being hit with that ball. So you see guys doing hurdles as if they were field and track guys, trying to avoid getting hit with that baseball. It's an absolutely amazing little piece of animation that's now been added to the game that's really cool. And it also affects you in the outfield when you go after a fly ball and you're about to hit the ball, the wall, not the ball, but you're going after the ball and you're about to hit the wall flush on. It really affects that because you take a hard licking against that wall, you go down hard, and it takes several minutes for you to recover, so you have to really focus on trying to hold on to that baseball after you take that hit. And that slow motion animation that you see in the game that shows you how hard a guy hit the wall, you have the biggest appreciation that you've ever had in a baseball video game for that, because you literally do see it and you literally are victimized by that hard hit. And the same thing happens at the plate when a guy goes to collide with the catcher at the plate trying to score. You see that same thing happening to you where you're about to hit that catcher and you know that you're about to hit that catcher, but you gotta stay focused, you gotta hang in there because you know that you're gonna hit that catcher flush on, and it's important to you to knock the ball away from home plate to score that run. So it sounds very little, but it makes the most realistic sports game on the market, and absolutely the most realistic baseball game on the market, all that much better. And in addition to ball physics, another thing they did this year was they addressed really one other drawback to their game, which was that their game didn't really follow a broadcast type of feel the way that it should. So the commentary wasn't really real. It was really repetitive, and it just didn't feel as much like you were watching a real baseball game. Well, they went and changed that, because in addition to improving the commentary, where when you're in season or franchise or road to the show mode, the broadcasters actually pay attention to what has gone on in the season and actually say, this guy's batting this average the last 7 games, or this guy has this many stolen bases the last 10 games, etc., etc., etc. They also added brand new broadcast cameras, so that when you have it on broadcast mode, it literally does feel as though you're watching the game as you would watch it on television. So much so that you have the overhead view of the catcher and home plate, and that's actually better than having the close-up view to the pitcher that you would normally be accustomed to using in a baseball video game, because you can actually see the entire field that way. And you see animations like in between innings, you'll hear them go, Matt Vasgersian, Dave Campbell, and Eric Karros back here with you, as internet sensation that dude Brandon Phillips gets ready to lead off the Cincinnati half of the inning, referring to his Twitter account and how big Brandon Phillips, the second baseman of the Cincinnati Reds, Twitter account is, and how much he uses that, and how much it really has changed the way that athletes use Twitter to interact with their fans. So little nuances like that that make it feel like a real game so much. And the other thing that ball physics did upon its implementation is that it actually made it harder to hit, much more harder to hit than it's ever been in any game thus far. So what I actually end up having to do, I mean, I talked about why you might want to go with the broadcast view just because it gives you more view of the field and you actually have a better visual experience as a player looking from that standpoint. But I actually went back to using that view when I was at the plate. You're supposed to swing at the ball, something that I found that actually works really well. So that's just a heads up for all of you show gamers, for you to get better use out of your game. And as far as the game modes that players are going to know from the game itself from past years, they really haven't changed much. Road to the Show is the same, but you can't really expect much change from that because it is a standard bearer and it really doesn't need to change because of how good it already is. So I really wasn't expecting much from that. Really the only thing they could do to make that better would be to somehow implement single A teams into the game. Get the contract to implement single A teams into the game and make it a harder, more difficult experience to get to the show in Road to the Show. Franchise mode is vastly improved. AI is a lot smarter. Teams will make moves realistic to the type of team and the type of market and budget that they have. As well as, of course, I talked about all the broadcast features and all the game modes. The big change game mode wise came this year in the form of Diamond Dynasty mode, which is a mode that's similar to an Ultimate Madden team mode, where you use player cards to build up a team, and then once you build that team, you can pick that team's location, logo, uniform, etc., etc. It's not perfect, it does need work, but it was a fun mode to play. With that, that is the end of my general review, audio-wise, for MLB 12 The Show. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on the game, you can check out my YouTube video episode that I recently uploaded, just entitled MLB 12 The Show Review. That's up on YouTube and on our sponsor website, geeky.com, so check that out. When we get back from the break, I do want to talk about a really cool experience that just happened for me as a gamer with this game. So I will do that, and then of course we're going to review the film Moneyball. All that and more coming up right after this on the Razman's Reality Radio.
Greetings, this is Sean McClain, aka Zaran Izarak, host of the Multimedia Chronicles. You're listening to my buddy Raz on the Razman's Reality Radio Show, brought to you by Geeky.com, when it's just not geeky enough, on Audio Graded and Channel 107.
You are back right here on the Razman's Reality Radio Show. I, of course, am your host, the Razman. And as I mentioned, as we were coming back from break, I was going to talk about a really cool experience that just happened to me in regards to MLB 12 The Show. What was that experience? Well, yours truly, as of March the 13th, 2012, is now the proud thrower of a perfect game. That's right. I was Johnny Cueto of the Cincinnati Reds. I was going up against Zach Duke and the Houston Astros, and of course I beat Zach Duke, but I also perfect game the Astros. That was the most nerve-wracking experience I've ever had. I did technically throw one other perfect game, and that was on MLB 10 show 2 years ago, but that one didn't count trophy-wise because I was forced to save that game before finishing it out. So I had to go back to that game the next day, and so it didn't really have the same feel. And that one was also on the road with a version of Reds pitcher Mike Lee that was just created for the game as a creative player. He wasn't actually a player that was in the game. This was with the real, updated Johnny Cueto, long hair, new motion and all. It was uninterrupted, and it was a game at home. It was in April on the calendar game, so it's very early in the year. Like, if I can do that with Cueto that early in the year when his arm isn't... And let me tell you, that right there was an element that made me really nervous, because that's yet another thing that the show is so good at, realism-wise. In the month of April, guys' arms aren't going to be stretched out the way they should be, so they're not supposed to throw as many pitches and go as deep into ball games unless they're just sailing through the game. So Cueto was so dominant that he struck out 15 guys over the course of that game. So that's the only negative thing about strikeouts, is it does raise your pitch count up. So by the 8th inning, the little energy meter that they give you to judge your guy's arm strength and how much he has left in him, it was virtually non-existent by the end of the 8th inning. So I was like, I have to send him back out here in the 9th, or this is not going to count. I'm not going to have a chance at this. What am I going to do? Thankfully, the stars were just aligned, and the video game gods were just in my favor, because all I had to do was throw 3 pitches with Cueto in that state. The first pitch was a grounder to Zach Cozart at shortstop. The second pitch was a fly ball to Jay Bruce in right field, and the third pitch was a pop out to, once again, Zach Cozart at shortstop. So it was an absolutely amazing experience. And then after the game, of course, the realism continued. The entire team absolutely mobbed Johnny Cueto. They then raised Johnny Cueto up on their shoulders. The crowd was going absolutely insane. The announcers were even into it. They barely mentioned what was going on the last 3 innings of the game, just like they would in real life, because they don't want to jinx the guy on the mound. It was the most amazing experience that I've ever had as a gamer, and one that will never be duplicated. I could probably throw 3 or 4 more perfect games, and it would be cool, but nothing is ever going to feel like that first perfect game that you officially threw. And I wish the show would match 2K's $1 Million Challenge, because I would be $1 million richer right now, possibly. Which, how amazing would that have been? But yeah, that is just something that I can't believe happened to me, and it's still surreal. With that, here is the Razman Reviews Moneyball, beginning with the trailer. Thank you to Universal for the use of the trailer audio.
There are rich teams, and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us.
That's $1, man. What? Welcome to Oakland.
I need more money.
We're not New York. Find players with the money that we do have.
I like Perez.
Got an ugly girlfriend. Ugly girlfriend means no confidence.
You guys are talking the same old nonsense like we're looking for Fabio. We got to think differently.
Who's Fabio?
Your goal shouldn't be to buy players. Your goal should be to buy wins. And in order to buy wins, you need to buy runs.
Who are you?
I'm Peter Brand.
First job in baseball?
It's my first job anywhere.
We're going to shake things up. Why don't you walk me through the board?
I believe there's a championship team that we could afford because everyone else undervalues them, like an island of misfit toys.
We want you at first base.
I've only ever played catcher.
It's not that hard, Scott. Tell him, Wash.
It's incredibly hard.
He can't throw. But what can he do?
You want me to speak?
We're not pointing you yet.
He gets on base.
We are card counters at the blackjack table. We're going to turn the odds on the casino. I'm heading in. Text me the play-by-play.
Wait, what?
I don't watch the games.
Billy Bean has tried to reinvent a system that's been working for years. There was a nice theory, just not working out.
How long is Billy Bean going to last?
He's proven himself right out of a job.
in their minds is threatening the game. It's threatening the way that they do things.
Hey, Daddy, do you think you'll lose your job?
What? Where did you hear that?
Well, I go on the internet sometimes.
Don't go on the internet. Watch TV or talk to people.
You're discounting what scouts have done for 150 years?
What the hell am I doing?
What is happening in Oakland?
It defies everything we know about baseball.
Just plain crazy.
If we win with this team, we'll change the game. This better work. I'm just kidding.
Moneyball is a film that I have been dying to see ever since it was announced it was being made, because as any true baseball fanatic knows, Moneyball changed the way the game is played today. Billy Beane and his system that he created with a man known as Peter Brand in Moneyball. I do apologize because my brain is farting. His actual name is something else, and that was the only non-true element to this film. He asked that while he gave permission for a story to be told, that he wanted his actual name to be changed to something else for the film. Not sure why that was the case, but that was a wish of his that of course they granted. But Peter Brand is the character's name in the film, played of course by Jonah Hill. But Billy Beane and the Peter Brand individual, they changed the game and the way the game is done. Instead of scouts looking at, okay, how many quote-unquote tools does the guy have? How does he look? How does he present himself? What kind of confidence does he exude by the people that he hangs out with? Instead, what they realized was that most teams get a certain amount of money that they can spend, and that's it. Most teams are told by their owners, look, this is how much I can spend on this team because of the city we live in, because of the amount of people that attend the games, etc., etc., etc. So this is the budget that you have to work with. You have this much that you can allocate toward players and coaches and training staffs, everything, every year. And your job as a general manager is to take this budget that I've given you and make it work. Build us a championship team out of this amount of money. No more, no less. And as you heard from the trailer, the problem that Billy Beane was having back in 2003 when this film was made, because of the season in which this story happened, he was having the problem of he just couldn't win with the amount of money that he had in the old system. The Oakland A's that year had lost Johnny Damon, Jason Giambi, a bunch of good pitchers. Their team was basically gutted. And Billy Beane was frustrated, and he said, look, if you want me to win, you've got to give me more money so I can win. And his owner, as you heard in the trailer, basically said, we're not New York. Or another example would be, now we're not Boston. This is what we're going to do. This is the budget I have. Build me a winning team out of this budget. So what did Billy Beane do? Instead of panicking and going into a shell, he said, okay, this is the budget that I have. How can I build a winning team out of this? So he was going to try and get some undervalued players originally to start with. So he made a visit to the office of the Cleveland Indians. And while he was in there, he saw that a guy whispered something in their general manager's ear about a player that he wanted. And once he whispered something into the Cleveland general manager's the Cleveland general manager's ear. I said manager twice there, got tongue-tied. Once he whispered something into that general manager's ear, he went back on the trade. He said, no, Billy, you can't have that player. The player's name is escaping me at the moment. He's not relevant to the course of the story other than to set up what I'm setting up for you. But the general manager said, no, Billy, I changed my mind. I'm going to keep that guy if the deal's off the table. So Billy Beane said, that never happens. A general manager has an ego. He says, I am a general manager. I know how general managers think. General managers want to be the be-all, end-all of their team. They want to be the person that decides if their team succeeds or not. And here, this nerdy kid that looks no older than 23 years old, that I've never seen in my life, whispers into the ear of this GM, and the GM changes his mind like that. So he goes and he pulls him aside and he says, who are you, kid? And the kid says, I'm Peter Brand. And he says to the kid, he says, what do you do, Peter? And the kid says, I'm a mathematics major from Caltech. He said, mathematics major. He says, is this your first job? And he said, in baseball. And he said, it's my first job anywhere. And so then he says, why did this guy listen to you? Why does he care what you say? And he said, well, I have a different system for evaluating players. I believe that every team, everywhere, can compete because there's a championship team out there that they can afford because the players are undervalued. So Billy Beane, of course, actually he doesn't say that line until after he gets hired by the A's, because you heard that in the trailer. But Billy Beane, through his conversation with this guy, character named Peter Brand, realizes that there's something to this. And why does he realize there's something to this? Not just because he's desperate, which was the popular belief at the time. Everybody thought that he's only doing this because he's desperate and because he has no other way to win with the budget that he has. And yes, that was part of it. But the main reason that Billy Beane took to this philosophy is that Billy Beane was actually victimized by the old system. Billy Beane came out of high school and was a quote-unquote five-tool, five-star player. He was a player that couldn't be touched. He was a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-million prospect that comes along every 20, 25 years that the whole entire world was salivating over. And the New York Mets convinced him to sign a contract with them out of high school and forgo a full scholarship that he had to Stanford University. Well, it just so happens that for poor Billy Beane's case, Billy Beane was one of those guys that has everything on paper. Cannot be beat, cannot be touched on paper, but once he gets to Major Leagues, it all falls apart. He's great in high school, he's decent in the minor leagues, he's good enough to get himself a call-up, but once he gets that call-up, it all falls apart. And nothing Billy Beane did as a member of the Mets worked, and he went from team to team to team, and eventually, of course, wound up in Oakland. And one day, he gets frustrated, and he says to the manager there in Oakland at the time, look, I can't do this. I'm not a player. I want to quit and become a scout. And the manager raises his eyebrow and says, you want to become a scout? Seriously? You want to give up everything that you have as a player? Everyone dreams of being a player. You want to give that up and you want to become a scout. You want to evaluate players. He says yes, because there's something wrong. I was supposed to be this huge success and I'm not. I'm a failure at this game. I want to change the way that players are looked at in this game. I want teams to know what they're getting out of a player. So that was always his goal right from the very beginning as a scout. That is why he was hired eventually by Oakland, why he came up through their system and was hired as the general manager of the Oakland A's, because he firmly believed in his heart of hearts that the way baseball had done things to this point was a wrong way of doing it. So along comes this guy by the character name of Peter Brand, who is thinking the same way he's thinking. And he's telling him, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it through mathematics. We're going to use statistics. We're going to look at not how many home runs a guy has, or what his look is, or the kind of girlfriend that he has, etc., etc., etc. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what is the most important elements to winning a baseball game. And to win a baseball game, it starts with on-base percentage. A guy has got to be able to get on base above anything else. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at his on-base percentage. We're going to look at how many walks he takes per inning to help that on-base percentage. We're going to look at what type of situations he's reaching base on. Is he reaching base in situations where there's nobody out and it's the top of the first inning and he's the first batter of the game? Or is he reaching base in a situation where it's the 7th inning and there's 2 guys out and we're running out of outs and he hits a home run? Is he producing the kind of atmosphere that's going to help us be a winning team? And as Peter Brand, the character, said in the trailer, there is a winning team, a winning formula out there, because these guys aren't the typical players that everybody says, hey, we need to grab these guys because they're going to help us succeed. So basically, by changing the way the game was played, they took these quote-unquote bottom of the barrel players and they made them into winners. And it succeeded so well that year that those Oakland A's went on to win 20 games in a row, which is like unheard of, and something that's only been done twice by that team and by the New York Yankees in the 1920s. And they just changed the way the game is played. Even though they didn't win the World Series that year, everybody from then on looked at what the Oakland A's did with a bunch of no-names and how close they came to becoming world champions. And they said, what is happening in Oakland? As the trailer said, it defies all logic. There's something going on here. There's a system that these guys are using that we can use to succeed ourselves. So not only did Billy Beane find a way to succeed in Oakland, but he changed the game. He achieved his goal. He changed the way that scouts look at players and determine what a good player is and how a good player is going to develop within their system and what kind of player we need for our team to succeed. So it is an incredibly moving story, and one that is used in baseball to this day, because at the end of the film, one of the things you see is that the Boston Red Sox actually offered Billy Beane a buttload of money to leave Oakland and become their general manager in 2004, because they were so impressed by what Billy had done in Oakland. And the ironic thing is, Billy decides, because of what happened to him as a player, to never again in his life make a decision based on money. But the Boston Red Sox decide that they're going to use the Moneyball system, and the very next year, in 2004, what happens? They win the World Series. So it was an absolutely amazing story. It's not something that could have been written or scripted, because it's a script that nobody would have believed, but it was based in real life, and that's what made it such an amazing story, and it makes for an even more amazing film. Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill, Philip Seymour Hoffman, they give the performances of their career for this film. If you don't cry by the end of this film, I don't care if you're a guy, a girl, or especially if you're a guy who believes, oh, it's not macho to cry, I'm not gonna cry, I'm a guy, I'm straight, dude. Oh, I'm a macho guy, I'm not gonna cry, because if I cry, I'm gonna show weakness, da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm telling you, straight out. And just like I said with our Chataway 87 a couple of weeks back on the show, real men cry. Real men have no quarrels or no reasons why they can't show emotion. And if you don't show emotion by the end of this film, then in my opinion, you have no soul. This is Rocky meets Field of Dreams. This is the element of Rocky that everybody loves. The element of the underdog rising up and doing something that he was never supposed to be able to do. But it's also Field of Dreams. The idea that it's more about, less about the sport and more about the characters and the people in this game that affect this game and make this game what it is and will it to succeed. That is what Moneyball is all about. And then you throw in the fact that it was based on a real life story. It is just incredibly moving. And like I said, there was a reason that Brad Pitt got nominated for leading actor at the Oscars this year, and a reason that Jonah Hill got nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars this year. This is just a phenomenal piece of work. It's been years, literally years, since I have been moved to the level that I was moved when I saw this film. Everything about it worked. The cinematography, the direction, the storytelling, the atmosphere, the believability. They cast actors that not only looked the parts of the players they were playing, including, as you heard from the trailer, Scott Hatterberg. That was when he first moved to first base, and Scott Hatterberg will always have a special place in my heart, because he was a Reds first baseman for a short amount of time in his career. So, and as was Ramon Hernandez, who was a part of that 2003 team. Ramon Hernandez just left our team. For the past 4 years, he's been our everyday starting catcher. Well, last couple of years he was splitting time with Ryan Hannigan, but the Reds have a lot of ties with the Oakland A's, and the players that the Oakland A's had, they then ended up becoming Cincinnati Reds. So that's another reason that this story means so much to me. It's because it's related to my Reds as well. And like I said, it's just been so long since I was moved to the point to where I was moved in this story. I looked at this and I saw a film that had all the elements to a film that you want a film to have. It had great direction, great storytelling, wonderful cinematography, great acting, believability, but it was all so real. It was so very real. And it just, by the end of it, you're like, please, 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 let these Oakland A's win a World Series. Billy Beane deserves this more than any human being alive walking the face of the planet today. That is the feeling that you get when you're watching this film, and it's just amazing. And then on top of all the baseball elements, you see more of the human element of these characters. Who are Billy Beane and Peter Brand? Who are these guys that are trying to change the game? What is going on with Billy Beane when he's away from the stadium, when he's away from the baseball field. You see the relationship between him and his daughter, and how much his daughter cares about him, and how much his daughter wants him to succeed and is afraid that he's going to lose his job. And his daughter was actually one of the reasons that he decided not to make that decision for money and go to Boston. I'm sure on some level he regrets it because he hasn't won a World Series yet, and I said Boston did the very next year using his system. So it was just an absolutely amazing story, still is. And even though the Oakland A's don't reach their ultimate goal of becoming world champions, everything that was meant to happen, that should happen to great individuals like this, do happen in this story. So that is my feelings on Moneyball. If you haven't seen it, please do yourself a favor and do so. You will not regret it. As always, archives of this show available 24/7 at ondemand.audiograded.com and on iTunes by searching the Razman's Reality Radio Show in US Podcast. Also, please don't forget to check out our sponsor website, geeky.com. When it's just not geeky enough, that's G3CK-E.com. This is reality according to the Razman, and Razman style is not just a catchphrase, but a way of life.
To keep up with the latest on Razman's Reality, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Razman's Reality.